In the previous two videos, I used a one-way encrypted password that cannot be decrypted. This means that a password cannot be retrieved and must be reset. With this video I will show you how to create a secure password reset function. Hi, I'm Ben Plessier and, like you, a fervent user of Wappler. There are 3 steps to the forgot password process. The forgot password form is presented to the user. They enter their email address into the form and then click the submit button. An email is sent to the email address associated with the user identified by the email that was entered. The email contains a clickable link to a page containing the reset password form. The link contains a unique key which identifies the user and validates the reset password request. The reset password form is presented to the user. They enter a new password twice for confirmation and then click the submit button. In Wappler, I open the main layout page. What I want to do is to create a modal that contains the forgot password form. I do this by selecting the login modal. I then insert after, a new modal. Here I delete the header and the footer from the modal. I also give the modal a recognizable ID. I activate the fade action. Inside the modal body, I remove the paragraph and add a row and a column. Inside the column, I add a form. I give the form a recognizable ID. I change the method to post. Inside the form, I add a vertical form input form group. This will allow the user to enter their email address. The label text is changed accordingly. For the form input, I change the ID. IDs need to be unique within a page. To ensure that this ID is unique and will not clash with the ID set in the login modal, I enter a ridiculously long name. This is mainly to emphasize the fact. Time out while I explain the reason for an ID for the form input. 1. It looks good in Wappler's app structure. 2. It is required for the label. When a user clicks on a label, it will select the relevant form input. In other words, if you do not care about the mention in app structure and you do not have a label, then there is no need for a from input to have an ID. The name is kept as email. This does not have to be unique. The placeholder text is changed. The help text is not required and is removed. Now I'll add a couple of buttons. The first will be transformed into a cancel button which closes the modal dialog. This is done by adding a mouse on click event and choosing modal hide for the action. The second button is transformed into a submit button. Don't forget to change the type to submit. To finish the form off, I add validation to the form input. That's it for the form. I will be comping back here after the backend actions have been created. What's left is to add a heading and an explanation. I add a row before the current row. Inside the row, a column and a heading. Change the hierarchy of the heading to an H4 and change the text. To top it off, I add a paragraph containing an explanatory note. And that is it for the Forgot Password form. The last piece is to create a button that will show the form. This button is placed in the login form. For this, I select the login modal and the row that contains the buttons. After the selected row, I add another row, inside which I add a column. Inside the column I add a button. The button text is changed. Then I scroll down in the Properties panel to Dynamic Events. Here I add a mouse on click event. The action is to hide the current modal and show the Forgot Password modal. Now we come across a problem. When the login modal is hidden in this manner, the form validation issues an error message. To stop this from happening, I click on Modifiers. Here I choose Prevent. This will block the default on-click handling. I save the page and close it in readiness for the creation of the server actions. For this, I click on Workflows. I start where I left off in the last video covering user, login and logout. To refresh your memory, this is where the database connection as well as the mailer function had already been created. Under API and inside the security folder, I create a new server action. I name it Password Request. This creates a JSON file with that name. In the JSON file, choose Input. This exposes the Properties panel where I am prompted to enter the page that contains the form inputs. Click the Browse button and browse to the main layout page. Select the page and the form from the Form menu. Click the Import from Form button. When I now select the Input Post node, I see the sole form input complete with the applied validation rules. The time has come to create the API action steps. Right-clicking Execute allows me to add the first step. This step is to neutralize the email address. Remember that in the previous videos, I changed the email address to lowercase. I do the same here. Then we have to make sure that the email address is one that is stored in the database. As in the previous videos, I use the validate step for this. In contrast to the previous videos, this time I choose exists in database. If this validation fails, the process is terminated here and the user will be presented with an error message. In this next step, I will require the user's current encrypted password. I choose Database Actions and Database Single Query. In the Query Builder, I choose the database table and the password as the only field. For the condition, I choose the email field to be the same as the reformatted email. One last adjustment before moving on to the next step is to remove the output option. This is required so that the details are not shown in the browser console. Now I will create a unique string that will identify this user and only this user. Create the next step and choose Core Actions and Set Value. In the Properties panel, I enter hash for the name as well as for the global name. For the value, I select the reformatted email and click the Format button. Right-click Email and open the cryptographic menu. Here I have chosen SHA1. For the salt, I have used the encrypted password from the database query. I close all of the windows by making sure not to choose the Cancel button. The last step is to send an email. I add a new step and choose Mailer, Send Mail. In the Properties panel, I enter the subject. Then I enter the sender details. For the recipient email, I use the reformatted email address. For the mail body, I change the format to HTML. I then click the Edit Content button. In the Data Bindings pop-up, in Design View, I enter some text. For brevity, I have not created a lot of text. This can be altered to suit as long as there is a word or phrase that can be used as a link. In this case, the linked word is here. Highlight the word and click on the link button. In the pop-up, I enter the link to the reset page. This will need to be a link to the live site. A link to a local site will not work. Then change to the Code View tab. Here we add the URL parameters that will filter the user by the email. To do this, first add a question mark, email, and an equal sign. Then choose the Dynamic Data Picker button and choose the reformatted email address. To add the second URL parameter, I add an ampersand, ID and an equal sign. Using the Dynamic Data Picker button, I choose the hash variable. Save the body text and we are done with the second part of the reset password process. Save the JSON file and close it. Now to finish the first part of the process off. For this, I go back to the main layout page. When the modal is hidden, I want the form to be reset. To do this, I select the modal and scroll down to Dynamic Events. In the pop-up, I choose Modals and hide. For the action, I choose Form Reset. Then I select the form, and make it a Server Connect form. For the server connection, I select the API action that I've just created. As a final touch, I will create a success message for when the email has been sent. For this, I go down to Dynamic Events and choose Server Connect Success. For the action, I choose a success notification containing an applicable message. Nearly forgot, the modal needs to be hidden when all is done. And that is it for the first step of the process. I save the file and close it in readiness for the third and last step. First, let's define the two query parameters that were used in the email link. These are defined in the main layout page, so they become available in the data picker dialogs. I open the layout page and select App. In the Properties panel, I click the Define Query Params button. In the pop-up, I create two variables. The first is called ID. The second is called email. Save the query editor and close the layout page. Now let's create the Reset Password page. Select the Pages node and click on the Create Page button. In the Page Properties dialog, enter the name of the page. This needs to be the same as what we used in the email link. In other words, password-reset. Make sure to choose the correct layout page. Click Save. During the rumbling, a plus sign appears in the center of the page. I click on the plus sign and in the pop-up menu I make sure that I am in the Blocks tab and select Forms. I choose the same form as I used for registration. This is because that form contains the two password fields that I require here. I guess that I could have created a form from scratch. It's called Choices. The form needs a bit of a transformation. This is done by changing the title and help text. I give the form a recognizable ID by selecting the form and entering the ID in the Properties panel. There are also a number of items that are not required. So they are deleted. The end result is two form input fields and a button. I go ahead and change the button text. Change the style and change the type to Submit. There is also a matter of removing the margin. The next step is to create two hidden fields, one for the value of the ID and then the other for the email address. It doesn't matter where these two fields are placed, as long as they are within the form element. I have chosen to place the two hidden form inputs before the row containing the two visible form inputs. I right-click the row and insert before a text input. I then duplicate the input for the second instance. I select the first form input and give it a recognizable ID. I have called it hash. Because the form is hidden, I remove the class. I give the form a name of hash and choose hidden for the type. Then I scroll down in the Properties panel to Dynamic Attributes. In the drop-down menu, I choose Value. For the value, I choose the ID query parameter. This is the value of the ID that shows in the address bar of the browser. I repeat this for the second hidden form field. The ID and name are called email. The value is the query parameter named email. As a last step, I add validation rules to the visible form inputs. Both inputs are required. The second input also needs to be the same value as the first input. I save the form and close it. I will be returning here after the server-side actions have been created. For the server-side actions, I open the Workflows panel. Under Security, I create a new server action. I call it password_update. I go to Input to grab the form inputs from the front end. In the Properties panel, I click on the Browse button and select the page that contains the form. I then select the form from the drop-down and click on the Import from Form button. A check of the post variable shows a successful import. Now for the actions. First, I will create the validate step. This is to make sure that the email exists in the database. For the validation, I choose the email that was shown in the query parameter. The email is already set to lowercase so that I do not have to convert it here. For the linked field, I enter email. Then I choose database and exists in database. I enter the database table in the email field. A small change in the error message to top it off. For the hash value, we require the password. This step creates a single database query that has the condition of matching emails. Then I create a step to recreate the hash. I go to Core Actions and set value. All of this should be familiar to you. I created the same hash earlier on. The next step is to create a condition. The condition is that the just recreated hash is the same as the one that is shown in the query parameter. If true, then the new password can be entered into the database. This is done by selecting Database Actions and choosing Database Update. For the update options, I choose the users table and remove all the non-relevant fields so that only the password field remains. If you remember, the password is encrypted using SHA-256 and a salt of Mundateskiffs. For the condition, I use the email field being the same as the email that came from the query parameter. If the condition is false, that is the hash values do not match, then we send an error message. Save the JSON file and we are done with the backend. In Site Manager, I open the password reset page. Up until now, I have been using the notifications component to message the user. With this page I want to use the alert component instead. This is a first for me. But with a bit of luck and Wappler's guidance, I am sure we will get through this. So, here goes. I choose the row that contains the two visible form inputs. Then I insert after, the alert component. Notice that the main layout page has now been loaded. This is because the link to the JavaScript file has been inserted into the layout page. I now select the form element. As I go down to the Make Server Connect Form button, notice the Get in the Method field. When I click on the button, notice that the method has now changed to the correct value of post. Just another example of Wappler's under the hood actions. Then I click on the Server Action button and choose the Password Update Server Action. With the form still selected, I scroll down to Dynamic Events and choose Server Connect Invalid. This event will be triggered by the response step with status of 400, which we added in the server action. For the action, I choose Alert Show. Alert type is set to Danger. For the text message I select a dynamic value. I want to show the custom error message that we added in the response step. Under the form element, open last error and select response. Close the dialog. Now for a success message. This time choose Server Connect and Success. For the action, choose Alert Show. The alert type is set to Success. The text content tells the user that the password has been reset. Save the page. Don't forget to save the layout page as well. Finally, we are done. Before I test the password reset module, I will make one little change to the email link. For this, I open the Workflows menu and go to Password Request. Select Send Mail and change the URL to the local host as shown. Back in the Site Manager, I open the index page and click on Open in Browser. Here I choose Login and Forgot Password. This opens a new modal asking for my email address. I enter the required information and click on Submit. Here I have sped the video up. Having to rely on my ISP can take a while to send the email. When successful, I see the message stating so. I received the email and when I click on the link, the reset password page is opened. Here I enter the new passwords and receive an alert that all is well. When I try to enter the password a second time, I get a message that the hash values do not match. This is because the hash value on the server has changed because of the new password. I have tried to keep the process as simple as possible, mainly because this series is aimed at newcomers to Wappler. There are other, perhaps better ways to achieve the same. I will leave that up to your imagination. For now, thank you for watching and look out for my next video in this series.